The silence in the house was a heavy shroud, far more suffocating than any argument. It had been weeks since Sophia had left, but her words still echoed in every empty room, sharper than broken glass. "You're not my mother," she'd screamed, her eyes blazing with a fury I hadn't recognized, a fury that twisted my heart into a knot of pain and resentment. How could the child I had nurtured, loved, and sacrificed everything for utter such a devastating sentence? It wasn't just the words. It was the raw venom behind them, the complete dismissal of everything we had shared, every sleepless night, every scraped knee mended, every dream encouraged. I had tried to be a good mother, or at least the best mother I knew how to be. But in that moment, all my efforts, all my love, felt like they had been thrown back in my face, utterly rejected and despised. I remember staring at the closed door, expecting her to open it, to rush back and apologize, to dissolve the tension with a hug, as she always had, even in her teenage years. But she didn't. The sound of her car peeling out of the driveway was the final, brutal punctuation mark on an argument that had festered for months, perhaps even years. Now, only the ghosts of our past conversations remained, replaying like a broken record, each one a fresh sting. My initial reaction was pure, unadulterated rage. How dare she, after everything? Then came the crushing wave of sorrow, washing over me with such force that it left me breathless. I was a mother, and my daughter had disowned me. The weight of that pronouncement was almost unbearable, threatening to collapse my very foundation. If this story touches your heart, and you're curious about the journey of forgiveness, make sure to subscribe to our channel and join our community. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of waking, existing, and falling back into a troubled sleep. Each morning brought the same hollow ache in my chest, a constant reminder of the void Sophia had left. I'd walk by her empty bedroom, the bed perfectly made, a faint scent of her favorite lavender air freshener lingering, and a fresh wave of grief would hit me. I'd pick up a photo of us from years ago, her as a chubby-cheeked toddler, my arms wrapped around her protectively, both of us beaming. Where had that innocent joy gone? What had transformed my sweet girl into someone capable of such cruelty? The questions swirled in my mind, relentless and unanswered. My friends called, cautiously offering condolences, but what could they say? It wasn't a death, but it felt like a death of sorts. The death of a relationship, the death of a hope. I tried to rationalize her outburst, to find excuses. Perhaps she was stressed with work, or struggling with something I didn't know about. Teenagers, then young adults, often say things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. But this wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment comment. It felt like an accumulation, a boiling point reached after years of unspoken grievances. I'd replay our last argument, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for the precise moment where things had gone so terribly wrong. Was it my fault? Did I push her too hard? Was I too critical, too overbearing, too much like my own mother, whom I had always vowed not to emulate? The self-blame was a venomous stream, poisoning any attempt at peace. The initial surge of anger, though potent, eventually began to wane, leaving behind a persistent, dull ache. It was replaced by a sense of profound exhaustion. I was tired of being angry, tired of replaying scenarios, tired of the constant emotional turmoil. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the sofa, clutching a worn-out photo album. Page after page, it chronicled Sophia's life, from infancy to her graduation day. Each picture was a testament to moments of joy, laughter, and undeniable love. There were photos of us baking together, building sandcastles, celebrating birthdays. My hand always close to hers. Looking at them, a different emotion began to surface. A deep, unwavering love for my daughter. A love that transcended the pain of her rejection. It was a love so fundamental, so ingrained in my being, that even her harshest words couldn't completely extinguish it. Beneath the layers of hurt and resentment, a fragile spark of hope flickered. This wasn't just my child. She was a part of me, a continuation of my lineage, a soul I had been given to guide and cherish. How could I let one moment, however devastating, erase decades of connection? This love, however wounded, began to whisper to me, suggesting that there was another path, a way to mend what felt so utterly broken. But pride, a stubborn companion, still clung to my heart, whispering its own justifications for my anger. Pride is a formidable opponent. It wrapped itself around my anger, justifying every wounded feeling, every sharp retort I hadn't made but wished I had. "She owes you an apology," it hissed. "She needs to understand the gravity of her words." And indeed, a part of me believed that. I felt entitled to her remorse, to her acknowledgement of the pain she had inflicted. The idea of reaching out, of extending an olive branch, felt like a concession, a surrender. It felt like admitting that her words, "You're not my mother," held some truth, that I had failed her somehow. That thought was unbearable. So I continued to nurse my wounds, allowing pride to keep the barrier between us firmly in place. Yet despite my resistance, the image of Sophia, not just as the angry young woman who had left, but as the little girl who used to seek comfort in my arms, began to soften the edges of my resolve. I remembered her insecurities, her dreams, her occasional flashes of vulnerability. Was it possible that her anger stemmed from her own pain, her own struggles that I hadn't fully grasped? Was her lashing out a symptom of a deeper wound within her, rather than a direct assault on me? The thought was unsettling, challenging my victim narrative, forcing me to consider a broader, more complex picture of our relationship. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, there was more to her outburst than just pure malice. One evening, while watering the small rose garden Sophia and I had planted years ago, a memory resurfaced. It was a day when she was about 10, distraught over a fight with a friend. I remembered sitting with her on this very bench, holding her close as she sobbed, telling her that sometimes people say mean things when they're hurting, and that true strength lies in understanding, not just reacting. "Forgiveness," I had told her, "is a gift you give yourself, Sophia. It's letting go of the heavy burden of anger." The irony of my own words now stung. Here I was, clinging to that very burden, letting it weigh me down, making me miserable, while my own advice echoed hollowly in my ears. It was a profound moment of self-reflection. I had always prided myself on teaching her compassion and resilience, but in this real-life test, I was failing. The message I had tried to instill in her was now a mirror reflecting my own hypocrisy. It wasn't about her anymore, not entirely. It was about me, about the kind of person I wanted to be, the values I wanted to embody. Could I truly preach forgiveness if I couldn't practice it in my own deepest wound? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was then that a new thought began to take root. A fragile but persistent idea that perhaps the path to healing wasn't about waiting for her apology, but about initiating my own act of liberation. The realization was a turning point. My anger wasn't punishing Sophia. It was punishing me. It was keeping me tethered to a moment of pain, preventing me from moving forward, from finding any sense of peace. The idea of forgiveness, which had once felt like surrender, now began to feel like an act of profound self-preservation. It wasn't about excusing her words or validating her disrespect. It was about releasing myself from the grip of resentment, from the toxic cycle of hurt and blame. I started to understand that genuine forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It means choosing to let go of the desire for retribution, choosing to prioritize inner peace over the need to be right. But how do you forgive someone who hasn't asked for it? How do you forgive when the other person is absent, seemingly indifferent? The answer that came to me, slowly at first, then with increasing clarity, was that forgiveness is an internal process. It starts within. It's a decision you make for yourself to free your own heart. It felt daunting, almost impossible, especially given the raw wounds. But the alternative, living with this constant ache, felt even worse. I knew I couldn't force Sophia to return or to apologize, but I could control my own response, my own emotional landscape. I could choose to reclaim my peace. This internal shift was the first, most crucial step on a long and uncertain journey. The decision to forgive was a quiet one, made in the solitude of my heart, but it immediately brought a subtle shift. The heavy shroud of gloom began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of calm. I wasn't happy, Not yet, but I wasn't consumed by anger either. This newfound space allowed for other emotions to emerge, primarily an overwhelming sense of love for Sophia, a love that had always been there, patiently waiting beneath the layers of hurt. I missed her, not just the presence of my daughter, but the laughter, the shared moments, the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. The desire for reconciliation, which had been overshadowed by pride, now burned brighter than ever. I knew I couldn't just call her and demand she come back. That would only reignite the old patterns of conflict. I needed to approach this differently, from a place of genuine understanding and unconditional love, not accusation. But what could I do? She wasn't answering my calls, and I wasn't sure if she'd even open a text message. I needed a way to communicate my feelings without pressure, without expecting anything in return. I wanted her to know that no matter what she had said, no matter how much pain I felt, my love for her remained. The idea began to form, a way to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, a silent gesture that might, just might, reach her heart. The idea that slowly took shape was to write a letter. A physical letter on paper, not an email or a text. Something tangible, something she could hold, something that wouldn't be fleeting like digital words. It felt old-fashioned, but also deeply personal, carrying a weight and sincerity that a screen could never convey. A letter would allow me to choose my words carefully, to express everything I needed to say without interruption, without the risk of an immediate, heated reaction. It would be my opportunity to lay bare my heart, not with accusations, but with love, understanding, and most importantly, forgiveness. I imagined her reading it, somewhere quiet, perhaps when she was alone and vulnerable, away from the immediate pressures of our last argument. The thought gave me a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about reaching out, it was about pouring out my soul onto paper, a final, desperate attempt to mend what seemed irrevocably broken. It was an act of faith, a hope that the words, imbued with genuine emotion, would find their way past her defenses and touch the core of her being. I spent the next few days contemplating its content, trying to find the right tone, the right message, the precise balance between expressing my pain and extending unconditional love. Finding the right words was arduous. I sat at my old wooden desk, a blank sheet of paper dauntingly white before me, my pen hovering uncertainly. My first attempts were riddled with self-pity and veiled accusations. How could you say that after everything I've done? Don't you realize how much you hurt me? I would write these sentences, then crumple the paper in frustration. This wasn't the path of forgiveness. This was still the path of blame, masked as vulnerability. It wasn't about making her feel guilty. It was about opening a door, not slamming one shut with more pain. The pen felt heavy, burdened by years of unspoken emotions and recent wounds. I paused, took a deep breath, and tried to shift my perspective. What did I truly want to convey? Not my hurt, not my anger, but my enduring love. I wanted her to know that despite everything, she was still my daughter, and my heart longed for her. I wanted to tell her that I understood, or at least was trying to understand, her side of the story. It wasn't about rewriting history, but about creating a new chapter. This required a radical change in my approach, a stripping away of my own ego, and a deep dive into the well of unconditional love that I knew existed within me, however buried it felt. I began again, slowly, deliberately. This time, I didn't focus on what she had done, but on what I felt and what I hoped for. I started by acknowledging the pain, not just my own, but the pain that must have driven her to say such harsh words. "My dearest Sophia," I wrote, the words feeling fragile, yet significant. "I've been carrying a heavy heart since you left, and I know you must be carrying one too." It was a tentative beginning, an olive branch not of weakness, but of strength, rooted in empathy. I wrote about the silence in the house, about how much I missed her presence, even the chaotic energy she brought. I tried to recall moments where I might have faltered, where my own actions or words might have contributed to her frustration without dwelling on them or absolving her of her own responsibility. It was a delicate dance, acknowledging complexity without assigning blame. This wasn't an apology for being her mother, but an apology for any ways I might have inadvertently caused her pain. It was an invitation for open dialogue, a plea for understanding rather than an ultimatum. The act of writing, of putting these difficult emotions into words, was therapeutic, a release I hadn't anticipated. As the letter progressed, it became less about the argument and more about the tapestry of our lives together. I wrote about my memories of her childhood, the small, tender moments that often get lost in the noise of everyday life. I described her infectious laughter, her fierce determination, her kind heart, qualities that I knew still resided within her, despite the anger that had recently clouded them. I wanted her to remember the good, to feel the warmth of our shared history, to know that the foundation of our relationship was built on something far more substantial than any recent disagreement. It was crucial to remind her of the enduring love that transcended our current estrangement. I also wrote about my own fears and imperfections as a mother. I admitted that I didn't always know the right answers, that I made mistakes, that I had sometimes been driven by my own anxieties or by a desire to protect her that might have come across as controlling. This wasn't an excuse, but an honest acknowledgement of my human fallibility. It was an attempt to show her that I too was imperfect, just as she was. This vulnerability felt terrifying, exposing my deepest insecurities, but I knew it was necessary. It was an act of genuine self-reflection, a willingness to meet her not from a pedestal, but from a place of shared humanity. The most challenging part of the letter was articulating the forgiveness itself. How do you tell someone you forgive them when they haven't asked for it and might not even believe they need it? I decided to frame it not as a judgment, but as a release. "Sophia," I wrote, my hand trembling slightly, "the words you spoke, 'You're not my mother,' cut me deeply. For a long time, they've been a heavy burden in my heart, but I've chosen to lay that burden down. I forgive you, my dear, not because you've asked, but because I love you, and because I refuse to let anger and pain define our story or consume my own peace." It was a declaration of freedom for both of us, a statement that I was letting go of the hurt, not to enable her behavior, but to free myself from its grip. I emphasized that this forgiveness was unconditional, an act of love, not a demand for anything in return. I wanted her to know that my heart was open, and always would be. It wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing a path forward where love, not resentment, led the way. This felt like the most authentic expression of the message I truly wanted to convey, that love always finds a way, even when wounded, and that true healing begins with the courage to release the chains of the past. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in an envelope, addressing it simply to Sophia. I didn't seal it, nor did I intend to mail it. My plan was to leave it where she would eventually find it, in her room, on her bed, a silent testament to my enduring love and my commitment to reconciliation. This was an act of hope, a gesture of faith that she would return, and that when she did, she would be open to receiving its message. The act of writing and preparing the letter had already given me a profound sense of relief. It felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a quiet, hopeful anticipation. Even if she never returned, even if she never read it, I knew I had done my part. I had confronted my own anger, processed my own pain, and chosen forgiveness. And in doing so, I had liberated myself. The message that he who forgives sets himself free even before being forgiven resonated deeply within me. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. This wasn't about controlling the outcome, but about controlling my own heart, my own peace. It was about planting a seed of hope, trusting that, in time, it might blossom into something beautiful. This felt like a genuine step forward, away from the bitterness and towards a potential future of healing. The days after writing the letter were different. The house still felt empty, but the silence was no longer suffocating. It was simply silence. I found myself engaging in activities I had abandoned during my period of grief, gardening with more vigor, reading books I'd set aside, even humming old tunes as I cooked. The energy I had previously expended on nursing my resentment was now redirected, however subtly, into living my life again. I felt lighter, unburdened by the constant internal struggle. It wasn't a complete transformation, nor was it an instant cure, but it was a tangible improvement, a noticeable shift in my emotional landscape. I still thought of Sophia constantly, of course, but the thoughts were less painful, less tinged with anger. They were now infused with a longing, a tender ache of absence, but also a quiet hope. I visualized her returning, imagined her finding the letter, reading it, and perhaps, just perhaps, feeling something shift within her own heart. I understood that this was my part, my offering, and the rest was up to her. This acceptance of what I could and could not control brought an unexpected sense of peace. It was a surrender to the unknown, a trust in the power of genuine love to eventually find its way home. Weeks stretched into a month, then 2. There was no word from Sophia. My friends cautiously asked if I'd heard from her, and I would offer a tight-lipped, "Not yet." Inside, a flicker of doubt would sometimes ignite, questioning if I had done the right thing. Had the letter been enough? Would she even care? Would she ever return? The cynical part of my mind whispered that I was naive, that I had exposed myself for nothing. But then I would recall the profound peace I had felt after writing it, the sense of release, and I would reaffirm my conviction. My peace wasn't contingent on her response. It was a gift I had given myself. Still, the anticipation was a subtle undercurrent in my daily life. Every time the doorbell rang, every unexpected car pulling into the driveway, my heart would give a little lurch of hope. Every night, before going to bed, I would glance at Sophia's room, the unsealed envelope still resting on her pillow, a beacon of my unspoken message. I never moved it, never considered mailing it. It felt right for it to be discovered, not delivered, a serendipitous encounter that might hold more meaning for her than a letter received in the mail. This waiting was a test of my newfound resolve, a practice in patience and unwavering love. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, months after she had left, a car pulled up the driveway. It wasn't her usual vehicle, but a battered old sedan I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs. A young woman emerged, her hair a bit longer, her frame a little thinner, but unmistakably Sophia. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, and there was an air of vulnerability about her that I hadn't seen in a long time. My breath caught in my throat. I watched from the window as she slowly approached the front door, her head down, like a lost bird returning to its nest. I didn't rush to greet her. I waited, allowing her the space to make the first move, to re-enter her childhood home on her own terms. The doorbell chimed, a soft, tentative sound that barely broke the silence. I opened the door, and there she stood, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like an eternity. There were no immediate smiles, no effusive greetings, just a quiet, almost hesitant exchange of gazes. Hers were filled with a complex mixture of exhaustion, apprehension, and something else. A flicker of regret, perhaps, or a longing for connection. Mine, I hoped, conveyed only love and acceptance, devoid of any trace of the anger that had once consumed me. The rain dripped from her hair, mirroring the silent tears that threatened to well up in my own eyes. This was the moment I had both dreaded and longed for. "Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken in days. It wasn't a shout, not an accusation, but a simple, almost childlike acknowledgement of my presence, of our connection. It was the first time she had called me Mom since that terrible day, and the sound of it was like a healing balm to my wounded heart. Can I come in?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously around the familiar porch. I simply nodded, stepping aside to let her pass, making sure my posture was open, welcoming, not demanding. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with months of separation, with the ghosts of past hurts. She walked into the living room, her movements hesitant, as if she were a stranger in her own home. Her eyes scanned the familiar surroundings, the photographs, the furniture, the plants she used to help me tend. I could see the memories playing across her face, a mix of nostalgia and perhaps pain. She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking small and fragile. I offered her a cup of tea, a simple gesture of comfort, and she accepted with a grateful nod. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, but pregnant with possibility, an empty canvas waiting for new strokes. I didn't know where else to go," she finally admitted, her voice still quiet, but gaining a little strength. Things got difficult. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I understood that she wasn't ready to share everything, and that was okay. The important thing was that she was here, back in the safety of her home, back within my reach. I simply listened, offering a comforting presence, a silent reassurance that she was welcome, no questions asked, no conditions imposed. This was not the time for explanations or recriminations. It was a time for presence, for gentle acceptance. After a few minutes, she slowly rose and walked towards the stairs, her gaze fixed on the landing. "I think I'll just go up to my room," she mumbled, almost to herself. My heart gave another hopeful thump. She was going to her room, the room where the letter awaited. I watched her ascend the stairs, her steps still hesitant, but with a slight air of purpose now. I didn't follow her. I didn't want to hover, to add any pressure to this fragile reunion. I stayed in the living room, my hands clasped tightly, breathing deeply, a mixture of anxiety and quiet anticipation swirling within me. The next few minutes would be crucial. I heard the soft creak of her bedroom door opening, then closing. The house fell silent again, but this time, it was a silence charged with expectation. I imagined her walking in, seeing the familiar space, perhaps noticing how little had changed. Then, her eyes would fall upon the unsealed envelope on her pillow. Would she recognize my handwriting? Would she be curious enough to open it? Would she dismiss it? 1,000 scenarios played out in my mind, each one adding to the nervous flutter in my stomach. I pictured her picking it up, her fingers tracing the words, perhaps with a frown of confusion or a tentative curiosity. I closed my eyes, sending a silent prayer, not for a specific outcome, but for peace for both of us, for understanding, for the strength to navigate whatever came next. I had done my part. The rest was in the universe's hands and in Sophia's heart. This moment felt like the culmination of everything I had been through, every tear shed, every internal battle fought, every word carefully chosen for that letter. It was the moment of truth, a test of faith in the power of unconditional love and the courageous act of forgiveness. I held my breath, waiting, listening, hoping. Time seemed to slow down, stretching into an eternity. I could hear nothing from upstairs, just the faint sounds of the rain outside. Then, after what felt like an age, a soft rustling sound, like paper being unfolded. My heart leaped. She was reading it. I tried to imagine her expression, her reaction. Would there be tears, anger, a flicker of understanding? I knew the letter was raw, honest, and filled with difficult truths, but it was also saturated with love. I had poured my heart and soul into those pages, expressing everything I couldn't say in person, everything I had struggled to convey in the heat of our past conflicts. I thought about the opening lines, my acknowledgement of her pain, my plea for understanding. I remembered the paragraphs about her childhood, the shared memories, the reaffirmation of her inherent goodness, and then, the difficult part, the declaration of forgiveness. Would she feel it as an accusation or as a genuine release? I hoped she would feel the latter, the freedom that came with letting go of the past, the invitation to build anew. This was my deepest hope, that she would recognize the true spirit of the letter, not as a judgment, but as a bridge back to us. Minutes later, I heard the faint sound of the bedroom door opening again, followed by soft footsteps descending the stairs. My breathing hitched. She was coming down. This was it. I braced myself, unsure what reaction to expect. Would she be angry? Sad? Emotionally distant? I heard her pause on the last step. Then she slowly walked into the living room. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a different light. The fury that had once been there was gone, replaced by a profound. The silence that followed her departure was not empty. It was a vacuum filled with the echoes of her words. "You're not my mother." Each syllable was a fresh wound, twisting deeper with every silent minute. I walked through the house, touching the things she once loved, her childhood drawings still tacked to the refrigerator, a forgotten hair tie on her dresser. Every item a poignant reminder of a past we had shared, a past now seemingly erased by a single, hateful declaration. My heart ached with a physical pain, a weight pressing down on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I tried to rationalize, to find fault in her, to dismiss her outburst as youthful impetuousness, but the sting was too real, too sharp. I collapsed onto her bed, the scent of her lingering on the pillow. How could we have come to this? All the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the unconditional love. Had it all been for nothing? The anger that had festered in my own heart for so long, a silent companion to her resentment, now felt hollow, an exhausting burden. It was an anger born of frustration and hurt, not hatred, but it had poisoned the well between us. I knew deep down that this chasm wasn't solely her creation. My own pride had built walls too. The night passed in a blur of tears and self-recrimination. The dawn brought no solace, only a cold, hard resolve. I couldn't let this be the end. I had to try, one last time, to bridge the gap. Not with more words of anger or defense, but with something true, something from the heart that transcended our present pain. I needed to tell her everything I couldn't say in the heat of the moment, everything my own wounded pride had locked away. It was then, amidst the quiet despair of a house too large for one, that the idea of the letter began to form. A desperate, fragile hope. The blank page stared back at me, daunting in its emptiness. Where to begin? How to encapsulate decades of love, misunderstanding, and pain into a few paragraphs? I picked up a pen, my hand trembling slightly, and the first words were a struggle. "My dearest daughter," I wrote, and even that felt inadequate. I scratched it out. "To my heart," I tried again, but it sounded too dramatic. Finally, I settled on a simple, "My love," because despite everything, she was, and always would be, my love. I started to pour out my heart, not in accusation, but in raw, honest reflection. I wrote about the day she was born, the overwhelming joy, the fear of motherhood, the promises I made to myself to always protect her, always love her. I chronicled the small moments, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the laughter that filled our home. I even acknowledged the times I had failed, the mistakes I had made, the moments my own anxieties had overshadowed my judgment. It was hard, confronting my imperfections, but it felt necessary. This wasn't about justifying myself, it was about opening up, showing her the vulnerability beneath the sometimes stern exterior she had come to resent. I wanted her to understand that my actions, even the ones that had hurt her most, had always stemmed from a place of love, however misguided they might have seemed. I confessed, too. The sound of the key turning in the lock was a familiar echo in the silent house, yet this time it brought a different kind of dread. It wasn't the usual hurried jingle of someone eager to be home, but a hesitant, almost fearful click. Maria walked into the living room, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning the familiar space. It was too quiet, too neat. No trace of her mother's usual bustling energy, no faint scent of her favorite tea brewing, no murmur of the television from the kitchen. A knot tightened in Maria's stomach, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Was it relief at avoiding a confrontation, or a nascent anxiety about what this absence meant? She dropped her bag, the thud resonating in the stillness, and wandered through the house calling out, "Mom, are you here?" Only her own voice bounced back. She found it on the kitchen table beneath a small, polished stone her mother always kept there. A simple, folded white envelope addressed to her in her mother's elegant, slightly shaky handwriting. Her name, Maria, stood out starkly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of apprehension. What could this be? Was it a final, angry condemnation? A list of all her perceived failings? She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly, the paper feeling heavy in her hand, as if burdened with unspoken words. The weight of her own words, the ones she had hurled at her mother just days ago, seemed to press down on her. The absence of her mother felt more palpable now, a silent accusation in itself. She hesitated, looking around the empty kitchen, almost expecting her mother to appear and snatch it away, or to offer a comforting word. But there was only silence. Maria carefully unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the first few lines. The script was unmistakably her mother's, each loop and curve familiar, yet the words themselves carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. There was no anger, no accusation, no echo of the furious argument that had driven her out the door. Instead, she read, "My dearest Maria, I know these past few days have been difficult for both of us." The words we exchanged, they cut deep. A lump formed in Maria's throat. She braced herself for the but, for the inevitable turn towards blame or regret over her actions. But it didn't come. The words continued, flowing with an unexpected tenderness that took her by surprise. It wasn't a rebuke. It was an acknowledgement of shared pain, a common ground she hadn't realized still existed between them. Her eyes scanned further down the page, taking in the careful phrasing, the pauses indicated by ellipses that hinted at unspoken emotion. Her mother wasn't just writing. She was pouring out her heart, carefully, thoughtfully. Maria had expected a battle, a continuation of the war of words that had defined their relationship for so long. Instead, she found an unexpected truce, offered without any demand for surrender. The letter felt like a fragile bridge extended across the chasm they had created. It wasn't just about the words her mother wrote, but the absence of the words Maria had anticipated. The missing anger was a presence in itself, a testament to a different kind of strength, a resilience Maria hadn't fully recognized in her mother. The silence in the house had become a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, amplified the ache in Maria's chest. Weeks had bled into months since the day Anna slammed the door shut, leaving behind not just a vacant room, but a gaping wound in Maria's soul. Maria would walk through Anna's room, running a hand over the untouched duvet, picking up a forgotten scarf, and a wave of grief would wash over her. It wasn't just the absence of her daughter. It was the chilling echo of her words, "You're not my mother." Those words, hurled in the heat of a moment, had festered, eroding the foundation of their relationship. Maria knew she wasn't perfect. No mother was. She had made mistakes, yes, but her love for Anna had always been an unyielding force, a constant, unwavering light. She often wondered where Anna was, if she was safe, if she was happy, or if she too felt the gnawing emptiness that separation brings. Maria yearned to reach out, to call, to beg, but a stubborn pride, mixed with the fear of further rejection, held her back. Yet, underneath the fear and the lingering hurt, a profound shift was occurring within her. The initial anger that had burned so fiercely had begun to cool, leaving behind a clear, albeit painful, understanding. She started to see her own role, her own contributions to the friction, not as a means to blame herself, but as a pathway to genuine empathy. She realized that holding on to the bitterness was only punishing herself, keeping her trapped in a cycle of resentment. The letter, now finished, lay on her bedside table, a testament to her conscious decision to break free from that prison, regardless of Anna's response. While Maria wrestled with her internal demons and crafted her heartfelt message, Anna was adrift in a world far less forgiving than her mother's home. The freedom she had craved so desperately turned out to be a lonely, often harsh, reality. The initial adrenaline of independence quickly faded, replaced by the mundane struggles of making ends meet and navigating unfamiliar social landscapes. Friends, once a seemingly endless source of support, proved to be fair-weather companions, their promises dissipating like smoke. Every small setback, every closed door, amplified the gnawing sense of regret that had begun to take root in her heart. She often found herself thinking about her mother's practical advice, her unwavering presence, the warmth of home-cooked meals, and the simple comfort of knowing she was loved unconditionally. The sharp edges of her anger, which had propelled her out of the house, were slowly blunted by the realities of life. She began to see her mother's actions, not as controlling or overbearing, but as expressions of concern, however imperfectly delivered. The harsh words she had flung at Maria now echoed in her own mind, laced with an unbearable shame. She remembered the look on her mother's face, the sudden crumpling, the unshed tears in her eyes. It was a memory that haunted her nights and distracted her days. The world had forced Anna to look inward, to confront her own immaturity, her own part in the rift. She realized that the independence she sought wasn't about escaping her mother, but about finding herself, a journey that felt impossible without reconciliation. The letter Maria had painstakingly written wasn't merely an apology or an explanation. It was an artifact of immense emotional labor. Each word was chosen with deliberate care, weighing its impact, its truthfulness. She pored over paragraphs, editing, refining, ensuring that every sentence conveyed not just her love, but her understanding, her acceptance of Anna's journey, and most importantly, her unwavering forgiveness. It wasn't about recounting every perceived slight or laying blame. It was about acknowledging her own imperfections and extending an olive branch forged in unconditional love. She wrote about the challenges of motherhood, the fears that drive a parent's seemingly irrational decisions, and the deep, often unspoken bond that ties them together. Maria understood that the letter might never be read, or if read, might not be enough. But writing it was a crucial step in her own healing process. It was her way of releasing the burden, of actively choosing forgiveness, not as a weakness, but as an act of profound strength. She meticulously folded the pages, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it with a tenderness usually reserved for a fragile photograph. This letter was not just ink on paper. It was a physical manifestation of her choice to free herself from the shackles of anger and resentment. It represented her hope, her belief in the enduring power of family, and her quiet prayer for Anna's return, not out of obligation, but out of a shared desire for healing. For Anna, the turning point wasn't a single dramatic event, but a series of quiet, cumulative moments. A particularly cold night spent alone, a friend's casual dismissal of her struggles, the unexpected pang of homesickness triggered by a familiar scent. It was the stark contrast between the harsh realities of her chosen independence and the unwavering, if sometimes stifling, comfort of her mother's love. She started seeing patterns, noticing how her own impulsive reactions mirrored some of her mother's more passionate moments. The anger she had so fiercely harbored began to feel hollow, an empty vessel compared to the deep, aching longing for connection that now consumed her. One evening, while watching a young mother scolding her child in a park, Anna saw a flicker of her own mother's worry, not malice, in the woman's eyes. It was a revelation, a sudden understanding that shifted her perspective. She began to recognize that underlying all her mother's protective instincts was a profound, selfless love, a love she had taken for granted and cruelly dismissed. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. She missed her mother. Not just the comfort she provided, but the person she was, flaws and all. The "you're not my mother" she had screamed was a lie, born of youthful rebellion and misunderstanding. Her mother was exactly that, her mother. And that truth resonated with a newfound, aching clarity. The decision to return was perhaps the hardest Anna had ever made. It wasn't a triumphant homecoming. It was a pilgrimage of penance, fraught with apprehension and a heavy sense of dread. Each mile she traveled back towards her childhood home felt like a step into the unknown, a journey not just across physical distance, but across an emotional chasm she had created. What would she say? How would her mother react? Would there be anger, tears, or worse, an indifferent silence? The fear of rejection was palpable, a tightening in her chest that made every breath shallow. She replayed their last argument countless times, dissecting her own words, her own hurtful accusations, and the raw pain she had inflicted. The shame was a constant companion, whispering doubts, reminding her of her ingratitude. Yet beneath the layers of fear and shame, a fragile seed of hope had begun to sprout. She yearned for reconciliation, for the quiet understanding that only a parent can offer. This was not a capitulation, but a profound realization that her own well-being, her own peace, depended on mending the fractured bond. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could take responsibility for her part and open herself to whatever awaited her. The journey back was a testament to her growing maturity, her acknowledgement that true strength lies not in stubborn independence, but in the courage to seek forgiveness and make amends. The familiar street, the old oak tree in the front yard, the slightly chipped paint on the front door. Everything was exactly as she remembered, yet profoundly different. Anna's heart pounded against her ribs as she hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The silence from within the house was unnerving, almost a judgment in itself. She pushed the door open tentatively, expecting her mother to appear, to unleash a torrent of suppressed emotion, or perhaps a chilling silence. But the house was empty. The air hung thick with an unspoken history, the scent of her mother's favorite tea still faintly lingering. She stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoing the unease in her soul. Her eyes scanned the living room, then the kitchen, searching for any sign, any indication of her mother's presence. There was none. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her, relief that she wouldn't have to face an immediate confrontation, but also a renewed sense of emptiness, a fear that perhaps her mother had truly moved on, or worse, wasn't there to forgive. She walked through the silent rooms, each step heavy with memory and regret. The house felt both welcoming and alien, a place of comfort she had abandoned, now a shrine to her absence. She felt like a ghost in her own home, a silent observer of the life she had once so carelessly dismissed, yet now desperately yearned to reclaim. Anna wandered aimlessly for a few moments, the quiet amplifying her internal turmoil. Then, drawn by an invisible thread, she gravitated towards her old bedroom. The room was neat, tidy, untouched, as if preserved in amber. It smelled faintly of lavender, a scent her mother always used. Her gaze swept across the familiar landscape of her youth, the worn desk, the faded posters, the bookshelf filled with beloved novels. And there, on her pillow, lay a single, plain white envelope. Her breath hitched. It was addressed to her, in her mother's elegant, looping script. A sudden, potent cocktail of dread and hope surged through her veins. She knew, instinctively, that this was not just a letter. It was a message. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The paper felt solid, real, a tangible connection to the person she had so deeply wounded. The simplicity of the envelope, devoid of any embellishment, heightened the solemnity of the moment. It was a testament to the raw, unvarnished truth it likely contained. For a long moment, she simply held it, the weight of it feeling immense. This was it, the moment of reckoning, of potential absolution, or perhaps confirmation of irreversible damage. The "You're not my mother" still echoed, but now, holding this letter, she knew her mother's presence, her essence, was undeniable, etched not just in her memory, but now, physically, in her hands. Anna's hands shook slightly as she tore open the envelope. The paper rustled softly, a sound amplified in the quiet room. She unfolded the pages, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. The words began to swim before her, each sentence a hammer blow, then a soothing balm. Her mother didn't accuse, didn't blame. Instead, Maria spoke of her own fears, her own struggles as a parent, her regrets for the moments she hadn't understood, hadn't listened enough. She wrote about the weight of unconditional love, how it can sometimes manifest as overprotection, born out of a profound fear of loss. Maria acknowledged Anna's need for independence, celebrated her strength, and most importantly, extended an unequivocal, heartfelt forgiveness for everything that had been said and done. "My dearest Anna," the letter began, "the silence has been deafening, but my love for you has never wavered. I forgive you, not because I expect an apology, but because I refuse to carry the burden of anger any longer. It hurts me more than it ever could hurt you. I forgive you for your words, for your choices, for your departure, just as I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for my own imperfections." Tears blurred Anna's vision. The raw honesty, the complete lack of self-pity, the sheer generosity of spirit laid bare on those pages broke through the last remnants of her own defensiveness. The anger she had clung to for so long, the stubborn pride that had kept her away, dissolved into a torrent of hot, cleansing tears. Her mother was her mother, in every profound and essential way. The letter lay crumpled in her lap, soaked with tears, but its message resonated deeply within Anna's soul. She sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her past actions crashing down, yet simultaneously, A lightness she hadn't felt in months began to emerge. The words of forgiveness weren't a magic wand. They didn't erase the hurt or the time lost. But they offered a path forward, a clear invitation to heal. Her mother had taken the first, hardest step, extending mercy without conditions, without demanding an explanation or an apology. This wasn't the fiery confrontation she had feared, but a gentle, open-hearted embrace delivered through ink and paper. Anna understood, with a profound clarity, that her mother had truly chosen freedom. Maria had released herself from the prison of resentment even before Anna had returned, even before Anna was ready to apologize. This act of grace was overwhelming, humbling. It wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about the enduring power of love and the courage to let go. The "you're not my mother" now felt like a cruel irony, a childish outburst that had momentarily blinded her to the very essence of motherhood itself. The letter was a testament to her mother's boundless heart, a heart that had chosen forgiveness, paving the way for Anna's own journey towards self-forgiveness and finally, reconciliation. Maria's footsteps, soft and familiar, echoed in the hallway. Anna's head snapped up, her eyes still red-rimmed, the crumpled letter clutched in her hand. Maria paused at the doorway, her gaze falling upon her daughter, then to the letter. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that moment, the weight of months of separation, of unspoken pain and lingering regrets, dissolved into the quiet understanding that passed between them. Anna stood, slowly, the fear and shame still present, but now overshadowed by an overwhelming wave of love and gratitude. Maria's face, etched with worry but now softened by relief, met her daughter's gaze. Then, a hesitant step, a small movement, and Anna was in her mother's arms. It was a fragile embrace at first, tentative, then tightening with all the unspoken apologies, the missed moments, the profound relief of coming home. Tears flowed freely now from both of them, not tears of sorrow, but of release, of reconnection, of a love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Maria simply held her, stroking her hair, whispering nothing, yet conveying everything. The letter had done its work. Maria had freed herself long before this moment, and in doing so, she had opened the door for Anna to find her own freedom. This powerful truth reminds us that forgiveness isn't about excusing the past, but about liberating the future. It's a gift we give ourselves first, a pathway to peace that transforms not just relationships, but our very souls. If this story resonated with you, if it touched a chord in your heart about the enduring power of family and forgiveness, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message. Let's spread stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the healing strength of love.